The chief security officer, Dragon, vanishes from a remote patrol cabin. Inside, investigators discover classified files, non-human biological samples, and evidence suggesting he wasn't hired to protect the Skinwalker Ranch. He was bait for something that had been waiting for him. The cabin they tried to erase from the outside, Dragon's patrol cabin looked ordinary, even dull. A weather-worn box with peeling boards, a rusted tin roof, and a padlocked storage door that barely hung straight. New visitors never questioned it, because it blended into the ranch like any other utility shed built for storms, cattle feed, or emergency gear. But the structure's existence raised silent suspicion among those who studied aerial maps, because it did not appear on any original construction records or land improvement documents filed before the ranch changed ownership. According to government property files obtained years later through a heavily redacted release, the patch of earth where it stood had already been tagged as a sensitive research point, long before Skinwalker Ranch became publicly known. This meant the cabin was not built out of practical need, but out of strategic placement. Investigators eventually noticed discrepancies that could not be ignored. The exterior wall dimensions measured several feet shorter than the interior. Nail patterns in the walls suggested the frame had been rebuilt multiple times, not due to damage, but purposeful modification. Even more unsettling was the discovery of industrial-grade electromagnetic grounding plates hidden beneath the floor, the same type used by classified laboratory test chambers meant to prevent signal interference or electrical imprinting. No ranch structure required such technology, especially not one located far from radio towers, electrical substations, or communication relays. Inside, the cabin carried an unexplained heaviness, as if the air itself held memory. Dust settled unevenly across surfaces despite no breach openings, and temperature swings were unnaturally precise, fluctuations in exact 5-degree increments over identical time intervals, recorded by digital sensors later installed by researchers. The building seemed less like a shelter and more like an observation cell, designed to record reaction rather than provide protection. When ranch staff checked original procurement orders, they found no receipts, no contractor names, and no delivery logs for building materials. Someone, at some point, built it quietly, quickly, and without paperwork. Years later, Dragon was assigned patrol coverage near the structure, not because it was remote, but because he unknowingly fit a pre-selected psychological profile matching archived research notes from Cold War behavioral experiments. He believed he was protecting the property, unaware that internal documents listed the cabin's true classification as a Neuro-Environmental Exposure Monitoring Unit, abbreviated as NEAMU. The intention was not to defend from unknown threats, but to measure how prolonged human presence near the anomaly altered cognition, emotional stability, and perceptual accuracy. When the team finally gained permission to lift the warped floorboards beneath the cabin, they expected to find old wiring, rodent nests, or abandoned ranch tools. What they uncovered instead did not resemble construction materials or emergency storage at all. It looked like a deliberately hidden access installation, sealed with industrial bolts far beyond typical ranch hardware. The panel did not lead to insulation or soil. It led to a reinforced compartment that contained objects with evidence tags, specimen storage, and a lock featuring a code format used exclusively in government containment facilities, the same codes later found in Dragon's personal logbook. Dragon's personal log and the off-record assignment. Dragon never knew he had been quietly linked to the cabin long before he ever set foot near it. On the surface, he was simply a trusted security officer, the kind of person who took his job seriously and stayed alert even when nothing seemed to be happening. He was calm, focused, private, and loyal to routine. These traits seemed normal for the ranch, but in hidden documents later found under the cabin, those same traits were listed as required psychological traits for long-term observation subjects. It was clear he was not chosen by accident. He was placed into a role that matched a government profile study, even though no one ever told him. His personal logbook, eventually recovered from his patrol bag, did not read like a normal security report. It slowly changed into something different. At first, the entries were about basic patrol details, weather conditions, and equipment checks, but over time the writing became emotional and confusing. The handwriting shifted from neat and controlled to shaky and uneven. The wording became shorter, more fragmented, almost like he was struggling to understand what was happening inside his own thoughts. He wrote about feeling watched when he was alone, not from outside the cabin, but as if the cabin itself paid attention to his movements, moods, and sleep cycles. The strangest thing about the log was the timestamps. They did not match real-time entries. Some were marked with future dates. Others repeated the same exact minute, but described different feelings or physical symptoms each time. Medical-style notes appeared in the margins, yet there was no reason for Dragon to record them unless instructed by someone else. These notes were written in a different ink and sometimes in smaller text, almost like they were copied from another source. It looked like two different people wrote in the same book, but tests later confirmed the handwriting belonged to Dragon alone. His emotional state changed with each entry. He began describing pressure sensations in his head, heavy tiredness that came suddenly, and brief memory gaps where he could not recall what he did for several minutes. These were the same symptoms listed in old government research connected to experimental psychological resistance tests. Dragon did not seem to know what was happening to him, but someone had predicted it. Pages near the center of his log contained short coded phrases and numbers. When compared to the access code found on the hidden locker under the floor, the numbers matched. This suggested he was being subconsciously guided to interact with something inside the cabin without fully realizing it. The log ended in a way that felt incomplete. There was no closing entry, no final thought, and no explanation. It simply stopped after a section where he wrote that he could feel something learning his reactions. The pages after that were blank, as if he either lost interest, was removed from the assignment, or something happened that made him unable to continue writing. The incomplete log pushed the team to open the hidden floor compartment, leading to the discovery of sealed containers, strange biological samples, and evidence that someone had been collecting material from something not fully human. The hidden locker and the non-human sample kit. When the hidden floor panel was removed, the team found a metal locker that looked like it belonged in a government lab, not inside a small ranch cabin. The box was heavy, cold to the touch, and sealed with a lock style normally used for biosecurity storage, not personal items. The paint on it was military gray and the edges were reinforced, suggesting it was built to survive heat, pressure, or impact. Nothing about it felt homemade or improvised. It was placed there for a reason, and it was meant to stay hidden for a long time. Inside the locker were carefully arranged items, each stored like evidence. The first section held sealed vials containing thick liquid samples in different dark colors. The labels did not list normal scientific names, only coded markings such as Anom A, Anom C, and Refuse Human Study. There were no signatures, no dates, and no testing instructions. The vials had tamper-proof caps similar to those used for classified biological material. The team did not recognize the codes, but later software analysis linked the labels to internal government catalog terms used in canceled research programs. Next to the vials was a folded Kevlar pad with dried stains on it. The stains looked like blood, but when tests were later run on small swab samples, the results did not match normal animal or human profiles. The lab machine returned incomplete data, meaning the sample contained something unknown or unregistered in public medical databases. Alongside the Kevlar was a tiny plastic evidence tray holding what appeared to be bone fragments. The pieces were smooth, slightly curved, and bright in color, unlike typical weathered bone. When tested, the the bone revealed an unusual density pattern found only in animals with high-impact skeletal structure, yet the fragments were too small to link to any known species. The most confusing item was a sealed microfilm envelope marked Echo Gateway Failure Report. The envelope looked old, possibly from the late Cold War era, and the material inside was still intact. When the film was digitally scanned, it showed scientific notes, temperature logs, radiation charts, and psychological rating forms. The documents described tests involving electromagnetic fields, isolation chambers, and response behavior under unseen stimulus. The final page listed the experiment status as failed, subject unstable, but did not explain who the subject was or what gateway referred to. There was also a handwritten card found under the tray, folded in a way that suggested it was never meant to be seen. The writing appeared rushed and emotional, warning anyone who found the locker that the samples were not from an animal attack, but from an encounter at the ranch during a previous research cycle. The message suggested that something had made contact, left physical injury, and then disappeared without any trace beyond what was stored in the locker. The final item, tucked beneath the microfilm, was a torn piece of an official document showing part of a classified briefing title. Project Anchor, Human Entity Interaction Protocol. This led the team to search for who was meant to be the anchor and why Dragon fit the profile. The cabin's real purpose revealed. The discovery inside the locker changed everything. Up to that point, the team assumed the cabin was only a leftover piece of old research, something abandoned years before anyone currently working on the ranch arrived. But after comparing data from the bone fragments, the coated vials, and the microfilm, it became clear that the cabin was never built for safety, rest, or storage. It was built for direct contact with something unknown. The evidence suggested that the government did not come to the ranch to stop the phenomenon. They came to study its reaction to humans, one person at a time. The deeper the team researched, the more disturbing the connections became. Radiation logs from the microfilm lined up perfectly with recorded spikes from modern ranch equipment, even though the documents were decades old. This showed the same energy readings had been active for years, unchanged by time, season, or technology. It meant whatever was present had remained stable, patient, and possibly intelligent. It did not behave like a random force of nature. It behaved like something aware of repetition and routine. When 3 digital files were decrypted from a damaged drive found near the locking hatch, the purpose of the cabin became clearer. The files displayed diagrams of the cabin structure labeled as Anchor Zone, Exposure Center, and Cognitive Trigger Line. Each section seemed designed to influence a human subject living or working inside it long enough for changes in their thinking, emotional balance, and perception to show measurable results. The diagrams also showed hidden wiring patterns in the walls, not meant to power lights or outlets, but to guide electromagnetic fields in a controlled shape, like an invisible dome. These setups are normally used only in classified cognitive field tests, not on open land. A short final note in the decrypted files stated that the cabin acted as an attractor point. It was not a defense system, but a bait platform built so that the unknown force in the area would consistently return and interact with the same human subject. This turned Dragon's assignment into something tragic. He believed he was protecting the ranch, when in reality, the ranch was being used to measure how much a human mind could withstand when exposed to a non-human influence over long periods of time. Even more concerning was the discovery that Dragon's emotional highs and lows recorded in his logbook perfectly matched energy fluctuations recorded in the cabin's structural wiring. His stress was not accidental, it became part of the testing pattern. The cabin did not simply record reactions, it amplified them, as if trying to produce a stronger connection between the unknown force and the subject. The most chilling detail came from a single shredded page restored digitally. It listed psychological compatibility rankings, and next to Dragon's category was a handwritten line that did not match any other part of the file. The line read that he was considered ideal for sustained entity attention, suggesting the government believed he had the perfect mental profile to keep whatever was here focused and active. The final decrypted file mentioned a hidden envelope labeled, "If I don't come back," and it was still somewhere inside the cabin, waiting to be opened. The heartbreaking truth. Inside the envelope. The envelope was found inside a small wooden compartment built into the wall near the cabin's back corner. It was thin, pale, and slightly wrinkled at the edges, like it had been there for several years. The words, "If I don't come back," were written in simple handwriting, with no date, no signature, and no extra explanation. Everyone who saw it understood immediately that it was not a casual note. It felt like a final message from someone who believed their life had reached a point where normal choices no longer existed. The envelope was opened carefully, and inside was a single sheet of paper along with a folded picture. The picture showed Dragon standing near the cabin at sunset, looking calm and focused, as if he believed he was part of something useful and meaningful. Nothing seemed wrong with his expression or posture. But on the back of the photo, a short handwritten line appeared, telling future readers that the dragon in the picture had not yet been touched. This suggested that the photo was taken before the cabin began affecting his mind, or at least before he realized it. The written message inside the envelope was heavy, slow, and full of fear, but not the kind of fear that comes from running from danger. It felt like the quiet fear of someone who could no longer trust their memory, their senses, or their thoughts. The message explained that Dragon believed something inside the ranch was watching him through his mind, not through physical sight or sound. He wrote that he often sensed emotions that did not belong to him and felt sudden thoughts that did not match his usual way of thinking. He questioned if the cabin was trying to train him or erase him, and he no longer knew which idea frightened him more. He also wrote that he discovered a small pattern in the strange timestamps inside his logbook. The repeated dates and broken time sequences seemed random, but when he compared them to the way his stress changed and how he slept, he saw a pattern. The timestamps matched moments when he experienced sudden emotional changes, as if the cabin was recording his reactions and adjusting the environment to push his mind further. Dragon finally admitted that he believed he was no longer in full control of his reactions and feared that part of his personality was slowly being replaced. The message ended in the saddest way possible. He wrote that if anyone ever found the letter, they needed to understand that he did not stay near the cabin out of loyalty or bravery. He stayed because the cabin made it almost impossible for him to walk away, like something invisible kept pulling him back. His final sentence expressed that if his mind ever changed too much, he hoped others would remember who he used to be before he entered the cabin. At the bottom of the page, in faded ink, there was one more note that seemed added later. A warning that the cameras outside the cabin would someday reveal what the human eye could not see, leading directly to the final discovery. The final record. The vanishing cameras. The warning about the cameras changed the focus of the investigation. Until then, most of the attention had been on Dragon, the cabin, and the hidden materials. But if the camera recordings held proof, then the truth might not only be emotional or psychological, it could be physical and measurable. The team collected every video file from external security cameras that had once pointed toward the patrol cabin. Most of the footage looked normal at first, showing quiet nights, still trees, and empty land. But after a certain date, something strange began to affect the recordings. Instead of showing a normal timeline, the video started to display repeating fragments. A minute would play, then rewind, then loop forward again at a slightly different angle or lighting level. Sometimes objects changed position between loops, even though there was no sign of movement. A rock could be on the left side of the ground in one loop and on the right side in the next, with no visible transition. Animals also behaved strangely in the recordings. Cows and deer near the cabin froze like statues, holding the same position for several seconds, then suddenly appeared in a new location without showing steps or movement. This was not typical video corruption. It looked like reality itself kept resetting. The most disturbing footage came from a camera mounted on a pole facing the cabin door. In some frames, the cabin appeared slightly taller or wider, even though it never changed physically. The wood panels also shifted patterns between loops, as if the building was not fully locked into one form. When the footage was slowed down and analyzed frame by frame, small flashes of light appeared at the edges of the screen. These lights did not look like insects, reflections, or dust. Instead, they formed thin, curved lines that resembled symbols or shapes found in the microfilm documents. Later footage showed something even harder to explain. A few recordings appeared to show the future, not the past. In one file, an empty chair was visible outside the cabin, even though the team knew it had only been placed there 3 days after the recording date. In another file, a toolbox appeared in a location where no one remembered placing it until several days later. The files were eventually labeled as reverse time footage, meaning that the recordings behaved as if something was playing information backwards from an event that had not yet happened. The final sign that something was deeply wrong happened when the cameras began to disappear from their own footage. In one recording, the shadow of the camera pole slowly faded until it no longer existed in the image, even though the pole was still physically present in real life. Hours later, the image turned completely black, and no more data was captured. One by one, every camera facing the cabin stopped recording without showing any error messages or physical damage. The decision was made to seal the cabin permanently. No one slept near it again, and Dragon avoided public conversation about his experience. The evidence was stored, the cabin was locked, and the ranch marked the site as restricted. The heartbreaking part was not only what happened to Dragon, but that the cabin proved something far more unsettling. The unknown on the ranch did not just watch. It learned, waited, and changed the rules whenever humans got too close. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.